I don't want to.
So some general Zoom etiquette. So if you are not the person talking, if you could put yourself on mute, that will help us from getting feedback and stuff. And by now, you're all very professional Zoomers, I know. We're still expecting a bunch more people. What do you think? Should we give one more minute? Let's give one more minute and then we'll get started because I want to be mindful of your time, but we'll have at least 3 minutes of grace for people. And we will accept questions. We're going to have questions and answers at the end of the presentation. But if you think of a question while we're doing the presentation, if you can just put it in the chat, then we will get to those questions at the end. We want to make sure we can get through the full presentation and then just have as much time for questions as we need. And our hope is that tonight's Zoom will last for, an hour-ish, and maybe a little bit more if you guys are really engaged with the questions. But obviously, it's less awkward to walk out of a room if you're on Zoom than if you're in a room. So you can quietly excuse yourself if you need to. All right, well, why don't we get started? Before we start our presentation, I want to introduce myself to you in case there's anybody who doesn't know me. So I'm your Bishop, Jennifer Reddall, and it's good to see a lot of people I recognize on this Zoom. So it's always good to be in the diocese long enough where I'm like, oh, I know you people. It's good to see you. But I am not here alone tonight. I am here with the other 4 pilgrims who went to Kenya, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. And can you introduce yourself the way you would have done it in Kenya? So if I were in Kenya and I were introducing myself to you, I would say, praise God. And you would all say,
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. And then I would say, I'm Bishop Jennifer Reddall of the Episcopal Diocese of Arizona. Canon Anita, would you introduce yourself?
Praise the Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
I am the Reverend Canon Anita Braden, and I serve as Canon to the Ordinary and Chief of Staff in the Diocese of Arizona.
Canon Clyde.
Yes, and if I were in Africa, I would start by saying, God is good. And you
All
would
the time.
respond.
All the time.
And all the time.
God is
God is
good.
good.
I am Canon Clyde Kunz. I am president of the Standing Committee in the Diocese of Arizona, and I'm happy to be here.
And Susan Hillman.
Praise the Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
I am Susan Hillman. I am from a parish that is about, I always said 2 hours, and at the very end, I thought, at least 120 kilometers from the diocese office. I am a lay leader in my church, and I am also in the diaconate formation program.
And Kathleen.
Hi, I'm Kathleen O'Leary. I'm a member of Trinity Cathedral. I and camp nurse at Chapel Rock. I identified myself as a nurse in the diocese.
Then will you bring me my hair?
And so Laurel, our Director of Communications, is here to be our tech help tonight. So Laurel, can you start our presentation and we will start sharing some stories and photos. So this is our pilgrimage to Kenya in 2023, our names, and a stone sculpture of Africa. I think, Clyde, this one is yours. Each of us were given one of these by the Diocese of Kisii before we left as gifts to take home and to remind us of where we had been. Next slide, please. So this relationship began at the Lambeth Conference last summer. So last summer, I was at the Lambeth Conference, which is at the gathering of all the Anglican bishops from all over the world, mostly. And I was at this table in the picture on the left where we met for Bible study and prayer and discussion every day for about 10 days. And within that group, Bishop John Oringa Omani, who is on the far right side of the picture, was part of our group. And he and I spent a good bit of time talking, both as part of the group and separately. And he really impressed me with a couple things. One is that he was younger than I was, which, you know, there weren't that many bishops who were younger than I was. But also he was, he does a lot of work with youth and was really engaged. And when I asked him about the ministry in his diocese, in addition to sort of describing church planting and all of that, he also talked about working in his diocese to end female genital mutilation. And my ears sort of perked up because I was like, well, that sounds interesting and like something I would like to support. And then our conversations proceeded, you know, sort of learning about his ministry and me learning about his ministry, he learning about mine. And we also had open and frank conversations about sexuality. One of the stories that I shared at our table was of marrying two women and what that had meant for the women and how I understood that as a, you know, sign of the love of God and, you know, what that meant for the evangelism for their families and for the community. And afterwards he came up to me and he was like, I don't understand anything about this. Like in my context, I don't know what this is. I don't understand. He's like, but I'd like to learn more. And I really appreciate that that was very much his attitude of sort of like, you know, I don't know what I don't know, but I'm curious about what your context is, and I'd like to share my context with you. So we continued our conversations after Lambeth through WhatsApp. WhatsApp is awesome if you're not on WhatsApp. And so led to us arriving in Kisii, Kenya in July. And the second photo here is of Bishop, this is getting ready for church on Sunday morning. It's Bishop John and I and Canon Anita and Johnson, his assistant, helping get us all ready for worship. Next.
So we have this map shown, so you have an idea of where we went. We flew many hours and days and landed in Nairobi, in the country of Kenya, which is the reddened part. And then in the next two slides, Laurel, if you'll go to those slides. If you see over to the far left, Lake Victoria, and if you go a little bit to the right, you'll see Kisumu. We flew into Kisumu from Nairobi the day after we arrived in Nairobi. It was about a 45-50 minute flight. We were met, we thought it was just going to be by Bishop John. We were met by Bishop John, his wife, a couple of bishops, lots of clergy, 3 vans worth of people. It was pretty wonderful. We then drove, I think, 2 hours to the area of Kisii that is in red. This was over rutted roads and it was fun. That's where we were, Kisii. Laurel.
The mission of the Diocese of Kisii was painted on their wall right outside the compound of the cathedral, which was to equip God's people to transform society with the gospel and be a growing, caring Anglican church boldly proclaiming Christ. And that was something that I thought was interesting because I would be able to say like, oh, well, that is our mission too. And that ended up being something I preached about on the Sunday that we were there. Next slide. Me too. So the Diocese of Kisii has only become a diocese this year. It was part of a larger diocese. And basically it sounds like the Anglican Church, there was a cathedral in Kisii, but the Anglicans had never really done evangelism among the Kisii people or in Kisii. Almost all of the Kisii region are Seventh-day Adventists. And so, however, Bishop John went through the process, was from Kisii and found his way into faith, into the Anglican Church, into the ordained priesthood. And the bishop of the wider diocese recognized something in him and said, I want to make you a suffragan bishop to evangelize the people of Kisii. And so he sent John back to Kisii to plant churches starting in 2016. So just about every church you're about to see has been planted since 2016. And you can see even in the 2 churches that you see here, some of the evolution of the buildings. So the way they plant churches in Kisii is John goes out and does one-on-ones with people in a community to see if there's a group of people who are interested in following Jesus in the Anglican Church. and they'll meet under a tree. And then when they have met enough that they have a core group of people, they will find land or purchase land or be gifted land and build a church out of sticks and or the sort of corrugated metal that you see there. And then once they have managed to grow enough to be that kind of church, then they build the church that you see on the right, which is a mud church. And so they build a church out of sort of mud, and you see the sticks and still the inevitable corrugated metal for the roof. Can you see the next one, Laurel? And then if you keep on going, then eventually you get to a point where they build the permanent church, which is made out of adobe brick, and which we saw in one place, they basically just built a trench around the mud church for the foundation and built the adobe church walls next to and surrounding the mud church. And then when they got to the top, they would knock the mud church down and get to a point where they had a church with a finished floor and, you know, with kind of eventually even in some cases electricity and things like that. But everywhere we went, people were just incredibly full of faith. They were also incredibly glad to see us. We were curiosities, but also people were very touched that somebody from so far away would come to see and meet them. Next slide, please. And so here's some more. And every church we visited, of course, we had to take a picture with all of the people who were at that church afterwards. Everyone wanted to be in the photo. Next slide.
Okay, so Clyde and I were in one car with the retired archdeacon of the diocese, which in the Anglican Church of Kenya is equivalent to our wonderful Canon Anita, basically the canon to the ordinary. And he was one of only 2 priests who worked with Bishop John when he began his ministry in 2016. He's now about 80 years old. And so, you know, Clyde and I had a lot of chance to talk with him and learn a lot from him. But on one of the first days we were there, the way that he described Bishop John and Bishop Jennifer's relationship was absolutely beautiful. He said, for Bishop John, falling into the arms of such a nice mother is so important. And I love that description for 2 reasons. One, because Bishop Jennifer isn't that much older than Bishop John, you know, less than 10 years, I think maybe 5 or so years older. But mostly I love it because mother figures in many, many parts of the world, basically women elders who are wise, caring, and protective are very much respected and looked up to in these cultures. And it's a perfect example of the respect that not only Bishop John, but pretty much everyone that we came across, the respect that they had for Bishop Jennifer as an elder and a leader of faith.
Yeah, and I'd just like to chime in and say, describe some of these photos. On the left and at the bottom of the screen, you see images of our bishop administering communion during the one Sunday we were there, which was an open air service held at the cathedral. And I would guess there were probably in the range of 500 people there under outdoor tents in a service that was 5 hours long. You will hear about that later, I'm sure. But I will just reiterate what Susan just said. Our bishop was incredibly well received. I remember one instance in which we were greeted by a young man, and Bishop Jennifer extended her hand and said, "Hi, I'm Bishop Jennifer Reddall." And he just looked at her and he said, "Bishop, wow." And for the rest of the trip, we were inclined to call our own bishop, Bishop Wow, for quite a while. Because she really made quite an impression. And at every single parish or congregation that we visited, we concluded that visit, which people in many instances walked many miles to get to in the middle of the week and waited for us. At the end of those visits, Bishop Jennifer would offer a blessing to that congregation, which it was very obvious was very, very meaningful to them. Next slide. So
church walls or a sound system. That's a really good question. And I think most people in this country would have definite opinions about church walls being much more important than a sound system. But if you look at it in context, there are a couple of things that I learned. And first of all, for even those of you who know me, you may not know that in my previous life, I was a professional musician. And I was also our sound engineer for live performances and a lot of the recordings that we did. We did 4 recordings, and a lot of that process, I was our sound engineer. So I was all about the sound systems. But that aside, one of the things that I was very aware of is that the people of Kisii truly understand and embody the fact that they are the church. It's not as much about where they worship, but they are the church. And so in that context, if you have, if you're worshiping underneath a tree, or if you are in a church like the slide on the left, open air walls, bamboo structure holding up the corrugated tin roof, that doesn't make the church any less important than, say, one of the ones on the other side, on the right hand side. The one on the bottom is one of the more advanced structures, but it really is about the people being the church and not the structure. And as they have more people, as they have more resources, then yeah, of course, they're going to build structures that are a little bit more permanent. But also, there is just so much joy in the song, in the dance, and having a sound system helps that. Kenyans have beautiful voices. They break out in song, and there are harmonies and, just like I say, lots of joy, and you will hear some of that coming up. But having a sound system allows them to also have musical instruments that are heard. Keyboards and electric guitars were a big thing. And so the joy is more exuberant with the sound system. But also, I would imagine, as a preacher, if you are in an open air church, it's probably a good idea to have a sound system so that people can hear you. So, again, church walls are a sound system. It's all about context.
And I just want to jump in because the church that you see here in the big picture is the one where they had their keyboard hooked up to a 9-volt battery. It was quite a system.
Yeah.
And it was amazing.
I found the clergy of the diocese to be committed, dedicated, and passionate. They were committed to preaching the gospel. They were dedicated in wanting to be a reflection of Christ in the community. And they were so passionate about supporting their bishop in the vision for the diocese. They were individuals who really lived into expressing faith, and what we have read about, great faith. I would say definitely wanting to spread the gospel. In the picture that you see to the left is Reverend Lucy, and she is the first female priest in the diocese. And she and I had many conversations about what does it mean to be the first and only, and how to build camaraderie. But I must say, to the left, the lady in the maroon, that's Mama Maureen. And Mama Maureen is deeply respected. She is a symbol, in my opinion, of many women who are the backbone of the ministry, who are teachers and individuals who assist in the planting of new congregations. And so women are the backbone of many of the ministries that are created in the new congregations. You'll notice to the right, there are women that are of a seated nature. You'll hear more about them. They are of a particular, what we would call an order. And so Bishop will talk about that a little bit later. But this is Sunday morning at the worship service that you heard lasted 5 glorious hours. Next slide.
Okay. I love that all of us are mentioning that the service was 5 hours, because I have that in mind as well. But you're right, Anita, it was 5 glorious hours. But before I get into that, I just want to mention something that I think is a very important fact about the cathedral structure. And that is that it was built by people of Kisii, but not of their own volition. It was built by them in their condition as slaves of foreign settlers. So to me, it's the fact that people were slaves in their own land, in their own town, in their own area, just is a whole nother level of slavery. So I did want to mention that. I mean, it's a beautiful church. I'm not knocking that, but just it's important to know the history. So I mentioned, and some of us have talked about, music in the worship services. And here are a couple of perfect examples. So the small picture of the 3 small pictures, the one on the top right, is Bishop John playing a 5-string electric bass or a bass guitar. And he started his exposure to the Anglican Church of Kenya as a church musician, playing the keyboard and guitar. And so music for him as well is very important, and he has no problem at all. The music is rocking, and he just went over and picked up the bass guitar and started playing it. But just so you have a feel for what it is like to witness the importance of music, Laurel, can you please play probably just the first 3 minutes of the video that is on the right? This is the procession of the offering and the elements for consecration. You might need to turn up your volumes a little bit. So the turquoise boxes are where we all put our offering.
And they were then counted in sight of the entire congregation with the total announced.
Yeah.
Susan, we can probably keep going because there's more music, I think, on the next slide.
Okay. And but then they bring the elements as well. They go before the offering, and they're dancing and singing. But yeah, just so you have an idea. Okay, next slide, please. Oh wait, no. Sorry. Well, that's okay. That's okay. We can keep this slide. But just speaking of the consecration, in one of the conversations that we had with Bishop John, Bishop Jennifer asked about the wording of the body and blood of Christ. And the answer that Bishop John had was, to me, very telling and fascinating, because in the Kenyan context, the term used for both the body and the blood is the holy sacrifice. And he explained that the only translation and context that we have sounds like we would be saying the corpse of Christ, and that we would be talking about real blood. So we refer to the the body and blood of Christ as the holy sacrifice. But then the question came up about the body of Christ as being all Christians. So how do you refer to that? And he said, oh no, we as Christians are the body of Christ because we're the body of the living Christ. So that was an interesting conversation about consecration and just terminology. So this slide in the upper left is Reverend Daniel. So there's Bishop Jennifer, Bishop John, Reverend Daniel, who is 98 years old, and his beautiful wife sitting next to him on the sofa. He was the first priest from Kisii to be ordained. He was ordained a deacon in 76 and a priest in 1978. And yeah, his physical health is failing him from, what his children were telling us, but he was sharp as a tack mentally. And he welcomed us with open arms, stories of his ministry, and of course, food, because we were greeted with food and tea everywhere we went. But it was just such an honor to be in his presence and to hear his stories. His story is of faith, of love, of service, of a lot of struggles, and of perseverance. And he talked about how his perseverance laid the groundwork for now what Bishop John is able to do. And, just knowing that and owning it and being able to be proud of it was just beautiful. Some of us were in tears just listening to him talk because it was so beautiful and so profound. The lower left photo is the five of us with Bishop John. And then sitting on the left is his brother Daniel also, who is a Pentecostal bishop. And he was the first person who introduced Bishop John to God. And he is the one who took him to an Anglican church to work as a musician or to start playing as a musician. And that's where his Anglican journey began. So his brother is also, a bishop of a different denomination, but very full of faith. In the middle are his two parents, Bishop John's parents. And next to his mother is Bishop John's beautiful wife, Beth, who is very supportive. And then we have another video on the right. So Bishop Jennifer gave the sermon in Sunday Mass. And a lot of what she spoke about were the similarities between the Diocese of Arizona and the Diocese of Upper Southern Nyanza - Kisii, which we all had to learn with dash and all. But one of them is the fact that they have congregations that are multicultural and multilingual. And this was part of her sermon that was an absolute joy for all of us to behold. So Laurel, if you could please play that, it's beautiful.
Essentially, I got a crowd of Swahili and Kisii singing people to sing in Spanish.
Yes. Yeah. No, it was amazing. Everyone loved it. So the only other special visit that I want to mention is I think it was the day that we arrived in Nairobi, or one of the first days we were actually in country. One of the priests of the Diocese of Kisii died suddenly. He basically collapsed in the kitchen of his house after some sort of a church event. And so we had the honor of going to his home and participating just by accompanying his family and some of the people from the diocese. So if you could all just keep Reverend Zachariah's family in your prayers. It was just very moving and an honor to be able to participate in that. Next slide.
Kathleen, I think this is you.
So we visited 2 schools, and this school was a high school. It's the only Anglican church in the Diocese of Kisii. These people don't look tall, but when I walked among them, I felt like it was trees. I mean, it was just massive. One of the issues that we confronted, we're told about, is they don't have any water. They don't have water pump. So a lot of the girls had to leave school every day and go and get the water and bring it back. And they would miss a couple hours of school every day. And we talked about music, and I know Canon Anita and I don't know if there's anything specific we were going to say about this, but after we had lunch, and all the kids, and there were several hundred kids, were in this, I guess it would be the auditorium of sorts. We heard them singing, and as someone said earlier, we were greeted with song everywhere. And we walked in and down this side aisle, and I remember I was overcome and started to cry and thought, these are the leaders and scholars of this country. It was overwhelming to hear their singing, their joy. What you can't see, and this happened in some other things, is people were very mesmerized by our hair. It's very different than their hair, so it was very common to have kids in our hair. And so what's going on here, I'm the little white person over in the center over there, is that there's kids' hands in my hair. And I'm going, someone's in my hair, someone's in my hair. And they're just giggling the entire time. And I know what happened to Bishop, Susan, Canon Anita. So this was just a place of joy, total of joy. Bishop, is this where I am transitioning into, or what is the next slide?
Next is Clyde.
Okay, Clyde.
And I will just say, nobody was like touching my hair at all. Just for the record. But I did encounter one young man who I was walking toward one of the churches on a dirt path, and he was coming up the other direction. And this young man appeared to have possibly Down syndrome, but I said hello and extended my hand to him, and his eyes got as big as saucers, and he took my hand and started rubbing my arms, and his eyes were just huge. I think I was the first Caucasian he had ever encountered. It was just a remarkable experience for me to have someone that react in that way to me. But we did our very first day there, we were scheduled to appear or to have meetings with the president of essentially the county council. That's the picture on the lower right, and also with the governor and the governor's entire cabinet. And the governor happened to be in China at the time, but the entire cabinet of the state met with us, and you can see his representative on the right in the picture in the upper left. We had just a great opportunity to talk with them. It was kind of a surprise to us that, you know, we preach the separation of church and state in this country. That doesn't really exist in the same way there at all. They clearly have a great deal of respect for Bishop John, who, by the way, is being consecrated this coming Saturday, day after tomorrow.
Enthroned, not consecrated.
Enthroned. They call it enthroned. Thank you. He is being enthroned as bishop. For that event, they have secured the soccer stadium because so many thousands of people are expected to attend. The president of Kenya is coming. Obviously, the governor and probably governors from surrounding states will be there as well. It's kind of a big deal. It's a really, really big deal, and it's recognized as a tremendous event by government officials. We were happy to be able to meet with them because the fact that we were Americans lent sort of an air of, I don't know, officialness to some of these meetings. And in fact, in our meeting with the bishops, or with the governor's cabinet, Bishop John was able to ask for the use of the soccer stadium for his enthronement and asked if he could have it free of charge. And they said yes. So I think we just gave him a little bit of an edge in that meeting, which we were happy to be able to do. Next slide.
So you've heard how powerful song can be. And one of the things that really touched my heart while in Kisii was that song and music and the expression, the African expression of song and music was something that just went deep inside your soul. And on many occasions, you know, I would be pulled aside to ask various questions about different things in America as an African American. And one woman came over to me and she's looking at me and she's like, well, I can see, you know, you're African American. And then I started to dance with them. And it was in the dance that they saw the connection. They say, oh, we see it in you. And so dance and singing is an expression of the spirit in worship and in joy. So there are some video clips that we wanted to share with you. And yes, Bishop Jennifer joined right in. You would have thought we were back in the office here. Yes, thank you. So I'd like you to notice that we're entering into a congregation, and we enter into the congregation in full song and full dance, and it's vibrant and it's alive and it's upbeat. Thank you. And there's one more video clip. It's joyous. It is vibrant. And these lovely lovely women that is featured in this video clip were out in the rain, waiting and waiting and waiting for us to arrive. And through it all, they were singing and dancing and rejoicing when they saw the arrival of the pilgrims. Next slide.
So you heard earlier that it took, actually it was 23 hours of flight time, that's time on an airplane to get to where we were going. We were pretty tired, but once we got there, we found that we were riding around in vehicles that seemed to have no shocks and no struts, and on roads that looked like these. If you look at the bottom lower left, you'll see the dirt roads with the ruts. This was pretty typical. I've got here a few photos that I want to just show you of some street scenes. You'll see on the upper right, these two donkeys. This is right in front of one of the churches we visited. And these two little donkeys just staked there, grazing at the side of the road. And the woman in the lower right-hand corner is selling guinea fowl, which is a wild chicken. That you just see people selling things on the side of the street. There's a lot of commerce going on, and a lot of commerce, in fact, because there's very little refrigeration in this part of the country. And so the markets are open every morning for people to secure the food that they need for that day. Next slide, please. Here's some typical street scenes. Again, you'll see on the left, the kind of open stall where people are just selling whatever they have to sell. And above, in the top center, you see a myriad of vendors selling all kinds of goods. This is typical on every street in every town we visited. The other two pictures, my fellow pilgrims will make fun of me because I was fascinated by the fact that everywhere we went, there were cows and goats staked at the side of the road grazing, but there seems to be very little in the way of trash collection services. So in the cities and even in the countryside, there would be areas where people would just dump trash. And very often we would see the cows and the chickens and the goats feeding from the trash. I was quite surprised at that. I mean, I would imagine the animals might eat something that would make them sick, but it doesn't seem to be a problem. Next slide, please.
Food. Everywhere we went, we were given tea, and tea is one of the main crops. We visited a tea plant on our way to Kisii from Kisii. It is backbreaking work, and we saw women in the fields picking the leaves. I have to say, I will never look at tea again the same way after I saw what those people go through. Upper left-hand corner gives you an idea. There was a lot of rice and what kind of coleslaw, things obviously that were picked that day and cooked that day. There was chicken and beef. The chicken, it was officially, someone called it a roadrunner chicken. These are not chickens that have sat on, comfy little things waiting for us to eat them. These were chickens that we could barely even crack the wing. And the beef was gristle, harsh. A lot of fruit. There was a tilapia, which is the upper right-hand corner. Kisii is very close to Lake Victoria, and so the fish was really, really good, and it was fried, and you could have it dry or wet, which meant there was sauce on it. Sausage, there was a lot of fruit for dessert. There was no dessert as we would know, the chocolatey stuff. There in the middle picture is what's called ugali, and that is a staple. It is a combination of maize, flour, and water. I did not like maize. I did not like ugali. Canon Anita loved ugali.
So did I. It reminded me of cassava.
Okay. And it could be white, there could be a brown color to it if there was more of a wheat grain that went into it, or almost a vague purplish tinge to it. So, and Canon Anita, I don't know what you're eating there, but it looked good.
It is a tree tomato.
Yes.
That's the
so
tree
excited.
tomato.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had not seen those in the 7 years that I've been back in the States after Ecuador, and I was like, tree tomato,
Okay.
please.
Okay.
It was
All right.
very good too.
And I want to say that Canon Anita is wearing a green type of cloth over her shoulder, as we were given many gifts. We were given a green cloth like this. When we later spend time with the Maasai tribe, they wear that same cloth in red. So we all received one of those as a gift. Next slide, please.
Yes, and of course, we were on the ground exactly 9 days, which is a very short time to be there after traveling so far. But we had our one and only last day in Africa. We visited Masai Mara, which is a large national park game preserve in that part of Kenya. And so we just took some photos. I've got some photos here of some of the animals that we saw. This baboon up on the left was really having a staring contest with us. The lions in the middle, we came across a pride of lions that was, I think, 15 in number. They had a fresh kill that they were feeding on. I did not give you a picture of the fresh kill, but these two lions were just part of that group that were off to the side a little bit. The bottom center, these are called Thompson gazelles. There are different varieties of gazelles. Thompson gazelles are recognizable because of the black streak down their side. And of course, we have giraffe and elephant, of which we saw many. Next slide, please. Up in the upper left, these are two Maasai women who were at the entrance of the park trying to sell us trinkets. Of course, Africa has ostrich, and this happens to be a male. You can tell he's male because he's black in color. The females are gray. And it was a really lovely day, but honestly, we were so tired. We had an opportunity the next morning before we left to go back out on safari for a few hours, and we all just said, you know, we would rather just chill because we were just exhausted. Next slide, please.
So I have an opportunity to share with you the impact that this particular experience had in my life. And I want to just say that experiencing Africa for the very first time was transformative for me spiritually and personally. I am forever grateful for the opportunity to have gone. But there was something about placing my feet as an African-American woman on African soil that was so deeply humbling. And I've thought about it often, and I came to the conclusion that it was so emotional for me because I realized that somewhere on this continent, my ancestors ran through the trees, married, had children, worshiped, danced, sang. And there is an ancestor, though I don't have the name, that came and was forced across the ocean, and the feet was placed on this soil. And even though my feet and the feet of the ancestors from that one person is here in America, we as African Americans never forgot Africa. We never forgot our homeland. And in many occasions, I saw the stories that I heard on this soil come alive over there. There were moments of movement, of body movement that I recognized. There were songs of deep movement of body and song that I recognized. There were traditions of respecting your bishop, respecting your elders, respecting the preacher, respecting those who were in service of the Lord that touched my heart in many ways. And I will also say that there were moments when, you know, tears ran from my eyes, not from sadness, but from so much joy of recognizing that my feet on African soil meant coming home in a whole different way that is beyond words. And I'm grateful for that opportunity. And I'm so thankful. And I am going to share that everywhere I go. And if you have a chance to go to Africa, go. Because there is something about being at the Masai Mara and seeing the open land and the animals roaming free and the beauty of God's creation that's humbling and thankful. And many times they would pull me aside and say, you know, we see you're African American, but where are you from? And so I took a moment to share with them that I took the ancestry.com thing, and it says Cameroon and Benin and Tongo. And they were like, oh, what do you know? I said, well, my grandmother Jamaica, Benin, Tongo. I said, okay. And then we started dancing. One of the most memorable moments I will cherish is when the elders gave me an African name, and that is Narinda, meaning joyful one. So I greet you as
Beautiful.
Narinda.
Nice.
And having Canon Anita there was an interesting experience of having her be a little bit of an intermediary, because although she was one of us, she to some extent was also one of them. And so she was a person that they could go to and ask questions. So at one point, somebody came up to her and sort of quietly asked her, is LGBTQ real? Nobody asked any of the white pilgrims that question, but Anita was viewed as someone who was safe to ask that question to. And she assured them, yes, that LGBTQ people are real. And that was something that was, you know, kind of present on the trip. Not all of the pilgrims that went are straight, but we did not share that with Bishop John or the folks there at the time. That didn't seem to be helpful. I know there's some question about, you know, in the Anglican community, you know, why do we foster relationships with places where not all of us necessarily are welcome or would feel safe? To me, I think part of our presence there, particularly with Bishop John's curiosity, is about, you know, certainly mainly exploring the gospel in that context, but also it's about planting the seeds and understanding that, you know, how do we learn about things that are not spoken of within our context? You know, was our visit helpful potentially for someone in Kisii who is gay? Would it be helpful for them to know that we were there, or are there things that we said and did that would make it easier for that person to be safe? And I think to some extent that was probably true. One of the things that I've noticed since we've been back is that a bunch of the folks from Kisii are now on the Episcopal list and follow us on the diocese on Facebook, which means they're getting all of the information that we send out about all the things that we're doing in the Diocese of Arizona. And I feel like that's a really good sort of glimpse into all the sorts of justice work we do for all people. And also a chance for us to be, you know, sort of learning what life is like there, including some of the things that they're doing around the prevention of violence against women and FGM. So I'll turn it over to Kathleen for that part.
FGM, female genital mutilation, not a subject that we talk about much in this country. Thankfully not an issue, at least in most cultures. In Kenya, FGM was outlawed in 2011. But it remains a practice going on. The prevalence of FGM in the Diocese of Kisii is 86% compared to 21% for the country of Kenya. This goes along with gender-based violence, incest, early marriages because people don't have the money to care for children, and the girls are the first to go. So FGM is done between the ages of 8 and 14, which really surprised me, but it is thought of as the path to womanhood, and it is made into be a big deal. It is done traditionally when the girls are home. A lot of girls go to boarding school or go to other places away from their villages. And so October, November, December are the times that FGM is committed. It is done in the woods. It's done in back offices. It is done by some of the old women in the villages. It is done with dirty instruments. So hemorrhaging, infection, and death are common side effects that occur. If a mother refuses to have her daughter cut, and it can be, I'm not going to go into all the variations of the cutting, but we're adults, you can figure it out. But if a mother says, no, I will not allow my daughter to be cut, she will receive such stigma and discrimination that they frequently have to leave the village and go to another part of the country. What Bishop John and the diocese is trying to do is provide a loving, safe, and long-term environment for these girls. There's also an 8.6% prevalence of HIV disease in newborns. And that goes along with the incest, the gender-based violence, all of that. It is providing hope and an oasis for the girls. So what he has done is he has secured an area, and this is, you're seeing a picture of a room, and there's multiple rooms that are adjacent to one of the churches. And he wants to open an orphanage. And he actually has the land. He has some beds that the girls would live in. And Bishop John has been speaking about this on the radio, in his parish visits, education nonstop to the diocese about needing to stop this practice. He is hoping initially to be able to house 60 to 100 girls, hopefully starting in January. Max would be 300 girls. Once they reach age 18, they then can go off on their own. They are considered adults. So he is hoping particularly to do some talks, conferences, whatever, starting in October, and in creating an alternative of entrance to womanhood that would be as significant and as culturally held as FGM is. So this was an ongoing discussion that we had, and Bishop Reddall will speak to more of that.
Thanks, Laurel. Next slide. So I want to kind of talk about what the overall experience of this was for us as pilgrims, but particularly for us as the Diocese of Arizona, Diocese of Kisii. The first thing I want to say is that they have things to teach us. This is definitely not a sort of one-way relationship of, you know, oh, here we're the Americans and we have all the wisdom and all the money. No, like I think each of us who went, like, we left learning more about our faith. I think we have incredible things to learn about church planting and about, you know, sacrifice and building community and loving Jesus. You know, it goes both ways. We had some questions about, you know, well, wait, we have a companion diocese with the Diocese of Western Mexico. Is this the same, different? Is it competing? I don't in any way view this as competitive with our companion relationship with the Diocese of Western Mexico. They are obviously literally our neighbors, and we go back and forth and have relationships with those congregations and those clergy kind of all the time. You know, Canon Susana Santabanez was just there for a conference. You know, that is strong and keeping going. And it's also a relationship that is built upon mutual ministry and is not financial. You know, we don't send money to the Diocese of Western Mexico. It's a relationship of kind of neighbors and peers that help one another out and each have some expertise. Diocese of Kisii is a diocese in need. They are a brand new diocese. They don't have any other overseas partners. And so we had, after the diocesan convention last year, I invited people if they were interested in supporting them. Bishop John and I had talked about their priorities, and that's when he said, I think the clergy would work harder if they were paid. I was like, well, I also experienced that clergy work harder when they're paid. How much does it cost to pay clergy in Kenya? And that was when he sent me stuff. And so the clergy salaries for the entire diocese of Kisii are about $2,700 a month. And that pays the salaries for, I think it's like 18 people now. It includes most of the clergy and a couple of evangelists. It doesn't include his salary. But so we were able to raise last year $18,000, which paid for many of the clergy salaries last year, and for which people were incredibly grateful this year. That is something that long-term, when we discussed it with them, he said, long-term, you've got to figure out how to pay for your clergy salaries. Like Arizona can't always be paying for your clergy salaries. And they have a strategic plan, both as a diocese and every congregation in the diocese, about how they're going to get income. Most of them are building buildings that will be income generators. Even in the cathedral itself has a huge building on a main street in Kisii that when they finish it will be generating income through rents that they can then use for ministry. They also have a little sort of strip mall of shops that also generates income. So they're very handy at making money, but still are hoping for and needing some help with those salaries. They also then prioritized a couple proposals for things that they were looking for. One, going back to what Kathleen was saying, was about the prevention of gender-based violence. And so we only got these proposals this week, so that's why we don't have them as part of the slideshow. But essentially, they said, in order for us to really address this, we want to have a series of conferences during the fall. So during September, October, November, to bring people in who are leaders of their communities to teach about gender-based violence, to teach about FGM, and why it would be good to leave this practice behind, why it would help families, why it would help women, and have that series of sort of conferences so that they can change people's minds, because they recognize that in order to stop the practice of FGM in Kisii, it's not just, obviously it's already illegal. It's a matter of changing, what do women want for themselves? What do women want for their daughters? What do men want in a spouse? Honestly, like if men didn't want a woman who was cut as a spouse, if that was not considered attractive, I'm sure the practice would stop. So they are working on doing that and having that lifted up. The cost they need for that broke down to about $47,000 to do all the conferences and then finish the building of the orphanage, which they call the orphanage. I think we would probably potentially call it a shelter, but that is sort of what they're looking for to do that. The Mothers Union is wanting to offer sort of microfinance, small loans. They have raised, it looks like about $50,000 of their own. And so they're looking for sort of people to match that, to help get more loans out to women so that they can have some economic success on their own and have the capacity to build things. They also have a proposal. One of the things that they're hoping to build in that front building is a pharmacy. Healthcare in Kisii is not particularly accessible. And so they want to have a pharmacy, which I think we might define that more as an urgent care clinic than a pharmacy. But so they have, for that, they're going to need a monthly salary of about $6,000 for the people who work there, and about $7,500 to finish the pharmacy. And then the other thing is vehicles. So you saw that we went everywhere in vehicles. We were somewhat segregated by our status, or our perceived status. So I got to ride in the bishop's car with the bishop and his wife everywhere we went. And Anita and Clyde and Susan were in the middle car with some of the clergy. And then Anita got moved up into my car over the course of the visit. Kathleen, blessed be Kathleen, Kathleen was in van 3, and van 3 was like a clown car that just every day got more and more people on it, including a rooster. Eventually, it was an adventure. But Bishop John's car it was clearly not doing well while we were there. And in fact, right after we left, it died. So it has been fixed for the moment, but he needs a new car so that he can get around. And so as a new to him used four-wheel drive vehicle sounds like it's about $15,000. We also identified that, you know, everybody in Kisii is getting around on motorbikes. And if the diocese had a couple of motorbikes, the clergy would be able to, instead of walking for 3 hours to their congregation, be able to take a motorbike to their congregation. So the pilgrims actually contributed to bid together the funds for 2 motorbikes for the diocese. Certainly that for a car for the bishop is something that was obvious to all of us while we were there. I saw a question from Scott. Like, why is there FGM in Kisii as opposed to the rest of Kenya? So I would say I don't know exactly the answer of that, but my guess is that it is because Kisii is very rural. It is very, very far away in a lot of ways from Nairobi and the urban areas of Kenya. And so I would say that probably the more traditional practices in Kisii are the ones that have taken hold. This was a wonderful photo we took on the last day in the safari of the elephants in the sunset. We're going to close the presentation and offer some time for questions. If you've got a question, if you can use the raise hand feature so that you'll come up to the top, or you can put your questions in the chat and we will try to answer questions that you have.
Bishop, I just have one comment, and I could be wrong, but I think that maybe one of the reasons, in addition to Kisii being so rural, one of the reasons that FGM might be more prevalent is if in the tribal culture of that area, it was more prevalent anyway, just because of, you know, because there are many different languages, ethnic groups, and we heard a few different times that the Bantu people who live in Kisii are not terribly well looked upon for any number of reasons. And most of the time we didn't know what those reasons were. But it could have something to do with that. I don't know for sure, but I'm just thinking.
All right, anybody have questions? You don't even have to raise your hand. You can just ask.
In the chat, Reverend Dr. Corey Meyer asked if there are women's groups that meet on Wednesdays with denominational color-specific dresses. Do you know?
The Mothers Union wears blue. So the Mothers Union was all the people in blue. The blue stoles, or the light blue stoles, I think were the evangelists. They were not priests, they were the evangelists, who are, some of them in training to be priests, but some of them not. Like in most places in Africa, the Mothers Union is, you know, it's like the ECW used to be on steroids, right? So it's all the women. They raise money, they control all sorts of things, they run things. And you know, the bishop's wife is the president of the Mothers Union for the diocese. So it is a very formal organization in that way. And I think it's interesting that one of the priorities for the diocese, and I mean, we saw a lot of things, there were a lot of different churches and programs that were like, here, take our plan, wouldn't you like to support us? And we said, everything has to go through the diocese. I want to hear what Bishop John's priorities are for this diocese. You know, I don't want to be making those decisions. I want to hear from him what the priorities are. The Mothers Union proposal made it. The Mothers Union proposal for doing microfinance for women made it. So that, I think, is a sign of both the strength of the Mothers Union and the strength of Beth, his wife, who was amazing. Scott.
Thank you, Bishop. This is, I think, an amazing, wonderful presentation, and your journey sounds like it was very life-changing. are there any, I have two questions. Number one, are there any plans for part of Bishop John and or his crew to come visit us down the road? And number two, when a larger macro question, when you were at Lambeth, was there encouragement from the small table discussions of kind of getting to know other bishops in other areas and developing these relationships when you were there?
So the answer to the first question was, is there a chance? Yeah, so Bishop John has been applying for a visa since like October of last year. The State Department's list or wait times for interviews to get a visa is infinitely long and has no end in sight. So if anyone has pull with the State Department, we'd love to have someone push a lever for that, because I would love to have him come here. I think it would be really interesting for him to come and see us. Also more cost effective for him to come to us than it is for a group of us to go there. And to build that relationship more. You know, I've certainly invited him to convention this year, but I don't think he's coming to convention this year because he hasn't had an interview yet with the State Department. But we would love to have him here. In fact, you know, one of the things about coming home is you see your life, right, through the eyes of the people you've just been with. You know, I go to Orange Theory Fitness and I'm looking at the gym and I'm thinking, how would I explain American gym culture to, you know, Bishop John and anyone from Kisii? Like, yeah, I pay money so that I can go and pick up heavy things and walk on a treadmill. Like, it makes no sense at all. And yet it makes sense in this context. The second question was, remind me what the second question was.
About your small table discussions at Lambeth and encouraging.
Oh yeah, so we were all sort of, the House of Bishops oriented us before we went to Lambeth, basically saying, expect every bishop from the developing world to be hitting you up for money. And that was definitely my experience at Lambeth, where I have business cards of every bishop from South Sudan. You know, every time you sat and ate a meal with somebody, they were giving you their cards. Bishop John didn't do that. You know, we were just having conversations, and I was the one who then initiated more of a conversation with him about like, what, you know, tell me more about your context and sort of what are your needs? Because I was curious. You know, I find that the Anglican Communion, we have these very formal instruments of unity, you know, the Lambeth Conference, the ACC, that, but to me, in my experience of the Anglican Communion, the real experience of unity is the individual relationships between dioceses, between clergy, between people, because that's where you actually get to know people. It's not through, you know, legislation and the ACC. And, you know, I think it is good to have relationships with people who are different and who you kind of go, wow, this is really quite different and yet similar. The sermon I preached, I used the image of the Grand Canyon because the gospel was building on rock and not on sand. And so I said, you know, try to describe the Grand Canyon to 500 or 700 people who've never seen a picture of the Grand Canyon. I said, you know, well, there's two sides and it's a big and I explained how big it was. There was lots of like, no, it couldn't possibly be that big. No, it is that big. And I said, but there's two sides of it, but they're both built on rock, you know, and I see us as, you know, we are both churches that look like we're very far apart and very different in a lot of ways, but we're both built upon the rock of Christ. And, you know, it is good for us to see one another and to visit one another and to see how we might grow closer. So that's why we do. I see a question about Bishop, are you wishing to encourage congregations to become involved with the diocese by finding the aforementioned needs? Who is I? I would say yes, like if you think that your congregation would be interested in this, if your congregation doesn't really have an extant partnership with an overseas partner or something, and you think that this would be something that brings life and joy to your congregation, yes. If you are someone who's listening to this presentation and saying, I want to go, I have to see this for myself. Like, I think if there's another group of people who would like to go, we would love to send another group of pilgrims and continue this relationship. But a lot of that depends on you all and whether you're, you know, whether this is the right fit for you and your congregations. I was excited that we raised the money we did for the clergy salaries. I'm hopeful we can support them in some other ways in the coming year or two. But, and I just, they're a new diocese, like you want to get them off on the right foot too. So, any deacon roles? We did not see any vocational deacons, right? So we did not see any vocational deacons, but they were interested in our formation. And that was one of the things that I was wondering if we could end up doing, was since we do a lot of our formation over Zoom, if there are ways that they could hook into like the DFA or something, and some of those things that we do here.
And I actually had several conversations because, I mentioned that I'm in deacon formation. And one of the big things was, oh my goodness. So when you were ordained as a deacon, then you can come here and work for 2 years and we will ordain you as a priest. It's like, no. So I spoke with several different priests and they don't have vocational deacons at this time. Some of them didn't even really know that didn't know what to think of the concept. So you're ordained a deacon. Sorry, I muted myself again without meaning to. So you're ordained a deacon. You were a deacon for 2 years while you were in seminary, and then you were ordained as a priest, from what I understood from the conversations that I had.
Other
It
questions?
sounded like Mama Marie would make a good place to start for a deacon.
Yeah.
Taqueria at msn.com.
Yeah, I'm Jeanette Renoff. I was a designer for the 1989 Lambeth Conference when we instituted those prayer groups, and had to fight very hard for it because one of the English bishops was opposed to wasting that kind of time when they had so much business to do. And when we put it in, the kind of thing that has happened between you and Bishop John is what we were hoping would happen, and it's so gratifying to me to find out that finally, that first of all, that they kept the Bible study groups as part of the Lambeth design, and that in fact they are having the kind of results that we had dreamt and hoped they would have when we put it in the design in 1989.
Well, thank you for doing that. I would say the things that were most important for Lambeth for me were the retreat days in Canterbury Cathedral, because really you can't beat going on retreat in Canterbury Cathedral and wandering around there. But then it was the small groups. I mean, it was those really interesting conversations studying First Peter, but also, we had the conversations about the Lambeth calls in those groups. And so we probably spent, I don't know, 16 or 17 hours together as a group, maybe even more. And you really did get a sense, now not every American bishop's experience of Lambeth was as positive as mine. You all saw the Archbishop of Canterbury was in my group. So I'm going to guess that just like I was on my best behavior in the group, everybody else in the group also was on their best behavior. So that was not all of my colleagues' experiences. There were other bishops and my friends who were like, oh, I hate my group. I'm so tired. I don't want to go to my group. Well, I was like, I love my group. But it was an interesting group because I'm not used to sitting in a group of people that have such widely different life experiences and theologies and ecclesiologies like that. I mean, I'm in the Diocese of Arizona, and there are ways in which we're pretty diverse, but it's nothing like that. And so that was a really good experience for me. And in fact, I would, my sense of the Lambeth conference, there's questions about, should we still have it? Is it too expensive? It's once every 10 years. I was like, I think we should do it every 5 years because, if you're going to just do it once when you're a bishop, if most bishops serve for about 10 years, you only have a chance to go once. I want to go back and see these guys again. I was during the Women's World Cup, I was texting the Bishop of Perth, who was in my group, about the Women's World Cup. That's the sort of just genuine human relationship that just seems really good.
It's so gratifying.
Thank you for that. Other questions? Around. If not, then I guess we are wrapping up for tonight. So thanks for coming and spending your Thursday evening with us. it's good to be here. And it was, it was exhausting travel, but it was good. And I am so grateful for the opportunity to go and have those relationships.
Thank you all.
Thank you so
Yes,
much.
thank you.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.